for God's sake. You know, in several ways, following Sonic Team is a lot like watching a drug addict struggle to get their life back on track. If Sonic Mania was the promising stay in rehab, then the newly released Sonic Forces is the going to a party, letting things get out of hand, and ending up snorting enough cocaine to make Tony Montana say steady on there. I suppose that makes me the beaten, weak-willed spouse in this weird analogy, too blinded by nostalgia of better times to cut my losses and just give up on the poor sod, even when I know deep down that would really be the best option. Forgive me if it feels like I'm being too blunt and ripping Forces to shreds without saying why, but I will get there. I left this one a while so that I could know for sure I wasn't just being reactionary or over-exaggerating how bad it was because of my personal feelings, but for now, I must say that it's such a shame it turned out like this. The initial trailer totally missold what this was going to be. Here I was, hyped up for a proper follow-up to 2011's Sonic Generations, a favourite among critics and fans alike, but unfortunately that's not what this is. So what is it, you may ask? To be honest, I'm not sure I know, and if I'm gonna unpack this mess, then I should probably start with the story. While some other people I know have praised Sonic Force's narrative, and it seems to generally be the most hit or miss element, I will honestly say I am firmly in the no camp on this one. To summarise, Eggman makes another bid at world domination, Sonic tries to stop him, but gets defeated at the hands of a team of returning enemies from his past, namely Zavok, Shadow, Metal Sonic, and Chaos. They are led by a new villain of the week, Infinite, who harnesses the power of a gem Eggman created called the Phantom Ruby. Anyway, Sonic is presumed dead, Eggman takes over 99.99% of the world, Tails is apparently a nutjob, though we never see any evidence of this, but apparently not all hope is lost because Knuckles and Silver have started a resistance, and their newest member has just joined. We'll get to them in a second, but the rest of the plot follows some familiar beats. Sonic's found to be alive, but being tortured by Eggman, again with no evidence, gets rescued and back into the action, the Resistance take back the world piece by piece from Eggman, and classic Sonic is just sort of there. He has a few stages here and there, he helps out, but story-wise, he seems to be an afterthought, very tacked on, and like a last-minute addition to cash in on something, not sure what. My first complaint is that it feels weird to go to a heavy, serious story like this when everything since Colors has been so light-hearted and jovial beforehand. While a serious Sonic story can work, the Saturday morning cartoon from the 90s is a testament to that, it's such a massive shift without any suitable lead-up. And even then, the characterization of Sonic and his friends has recently been so utterly vague, and the writing itself so dense and so not self-aware. This one particular line from Knuckles had me laughing my head off for a solid minute because of how baffling it was to see a red cartoon echidna scowling about war like he's Solid Snake in MGS4.
The Death Egg? Oh man, that's not good!
None of this is good, Vector. That's why it's called war.
You could argue that this is endearing in the same way that Sonic Adventure 2's cutscenes were endearing, what with the cheesy writing and the over-the-top scenarios, but I don't agree with that. Those games were poorly translated and, more importantly, had the advantage of being released at a time when video game writing wasn't held to such a high standard. It's not 2001 anymore, guys. Additionally, there's certain parts of the story that just don't seem to add up and reek of cut content, especially when they link to the gameplay. Chaos turns up in this initial cutscene, but is never fought as a boss, unless you count Classic Sonic bopping him in a cutscene. And speaking of Classic Sonic, his appearance, where he came from and where he went, only ever alludes to Sonic Mania. It's never elaborated on exactly who Infinite is, or was prior to working with Eggman, aside from him throwing a bit of a tantrum in some DLC, and you never see any of the consequences of Eggman's supposed depression other than the ruined city buildings and there being robots everywhere. Some of these issues are only minor, but others straight up jarring and plain weird. All in all, the base premise and plot here comes off as amateurish and outright silly, even cringeworthy at times. So anyway, how exactly are we going to fight Eggman's regime of destroying everything to build an ego trip city on the ruins? Well, our time helping the Resistance is spread across not one, not two, but 3 characters who get their own portions of this title divided between them. Firstly, we have Sonic. Modern Sonic, that is. For these segments, Sonic Forces returns to the boost style of gameplay introduced way back in Unleashed, which is odd considering that the previous game, Sonic Lost World, moved away from that. Regardless, the execution on a base level is pretty standard for this proven formula. Move around semi-linear 3D action stages using your platforming skills, a charging boost attack that allows you to break through enemies, press the jump button once more in mid-air after jumping to home in on enemies and bounce across chains of them, and if you're familiar with the last 10-ish years of Sonic games, this should all be fairly familiar. However, a few signature moves are notably absent from Forces, namely the drifting mechanic and the lightspeed dash. While the latter isn't a huge problem, the former got on my nerves as a lot of the level design presented seems to be designed with it in mind. There were quite a few sections where I would get flung off the side of a curve I know for a fact I would have cleared no problem if I was playing Generations or Unleashed and had that move available to me. Probably worst of all though, the jump dash is gone, replaced with a weaker variant of Color's double jump. The problem is you barely get any extra height on this one, so it just ends up being awkward. In fact, the controls in general for modern Sonic feel really awkward and wonky. Momentum is just really unnatural for some reason, and any sort of precision platforming is just an absolute no-go, especially in the 2D side-scrolling sections. These kind of jumps shouldn't be as hard as they end up being, and yet I just can't seem to get Sonic to do what I want him to. But if you think that's bad, let's talk about the second character, who is Sonic. But this one's classic Sonic. Confused? I wish I still was. In a similar vein to Generations, classic Sonic is back, but rather than being from the past, Forces seems to think he's from an alternate dimension. Come on, Sonic team, you already confused this issue with Blaze and Silver, can't you leave classic Sonic alone? But yeah, following on from the ending of Mania, he just kinda pops up with no explanation of where or why he's here in main series canon to try and bring some fun to this game. Unfortunately, this universe's laws of physics prevent him from doing so, and instead he ends up one of the worst parts. I don't know how they messed up these 2D side-scrolling platforming sections so badly when they had both Generations and Mania as references on how classic Sonic should control, but somehow he's actually closer to Sonic 4 Episode 1. His top speed is way too low, his acceleration is really quick, any momentum simply stops the second you're in mid-air, and speaking of mid-air control, every time I jumped off a ramp and was supposed to have the option to get to a higher or lower section of the level, it seemed like classic Sonic would just not stray from his path. I'm not sure if I'm missing something here or if it's just super stiff and difficult to make any changes to your course once you leave the ground. The neat little touches of being able to use the D-pad for more accurate control and using a single button to execute a spin dash that Generations introduced are notably absent again, but at least the drop dash from Sonic Mania makes an appearance. Or at least it tries to. It controls so jerkily compared to its free-flowing, game-changing appearance in Mania that it seems like some kind of weird joke. It's like they actively tried to make classic Sonic worse. But let's move on. The third and final character, the new member of the Resistance, isn't predefined but is instead a player-designed custom avatar. Yeah, in a move that blurs the lines between Sega Sonic canon and 13-year-old Weird Kids DeviantArt pages, we're going full Blinks 2 Masters of Time and Space on this and letting you be the unnecessary, one-hit wonder Sonic friend whose character development only makes sense within their debut game, but rather than getting a half-decent send-off, just hangs around and turns up to the Olympics every 4 years. The player could choose different species for their avatar, which gives them a specific perk, though nothing too special, just things like being able to keep a few rings after getting hit, and they also unlock new items of clothing to wear as the game goes on, but that's only superficial as well. In my case, I recreated Morgana from Persona 5. Why? Because...
You never see it coming.
And how do they play? Well, despite being the worst idea for a playable character, the avatar has actually implemented the best out of the 3 gameplay styles. While what we've got here isn't exactly imaginative, I hardly ever felt as if I was out of control or as if the mechanics weren't working properly, and it's almost as if they took modern Sonic sections, simplified and slowed them down a bit, adapted them for a less speedrun-oriented moveset, and called it a day. The biggest difference the avatar has to the 2 Sonics is that his main method of dealing with enemies is the Wisp-Ons, an evolution of the Wisps from Sonic Colors and Lost World. Equipping different Wisp-On weapons not only allows you to use different weapons such as a flamethrower or a whip, but each one allows you access to one of the Wisps, temporary power-ups that grant you specific abilities. While this is interesting in concept, I found the few I tried mostly clunky and really slow the pace, so for the most part I had no reason to change anything and stuck to the default flamethrower, which is more than enough to deal with any threat this game can throw at you. Of course, this also meant that in my case, I was using the Burst Wisp, and only the Burst Wisp, throughout the whole adventure. It's so strange to me that despite the complaints about how situationally and ham-fistedly the Wisps were implemented in Lost World, they'd go even further with that and make it so you can't use the other ones unless you've got the right Wisp on equipped. They're just teases. And when the level design locks certain collectible red rings behind these Wisps, that's a very, very cheap and ineffective way of adding replay value, and it doesn't work because I simply cannot be bothered to go through and get these. Anyway, every Wispon is also equipped with some sort of whip grappling hook thing, which could either be used for homing attacks or on designated grappling hooks in order to swing from them. While the red ones do require player input, the yellow ones are entirely automated set pieces, and that's a total bummer. Not only that, but the wire is used for drifting, and that's automated too. Like, did Sonic Team seriously not believe I could either press the A button in midair or hold down a trigger when cornering from time to time? Why am I no longer trusted with the things that made Generations fun? It's not like I'm playing the game on easy mode. I was in fact playing on hard, so come on Sonic Team, have a little faith in me. So now that we've talked about the playable characters themselves, let's talk about level design a bit, and oh my god, what happened here? So much of Force's level design is based upon either long straight paths that pose no challenge, blocky cubes that are unconducive to building speed, quick time events, or sections so automated that I'm certain I could put the controller down, go make a cup of tea, and come back before I get to actually play again. Generations and Unleashed had their cinematic moments, sure, but it never broke the pace. Any segments where the game gave you a break from the action were just that, a chance for you to breathe, whereas here it's like the game's holding your hand to stop you from going too far off the rails. It's ridiculous how often I found modern Sonic just boosting along, knocking down enemies like bowling pins, or watching glorified cutscenes of the avatar swinging about like a goddamn chimpanzee with little to no input from me at all. What's even more frustrating is that often when you die, it feels either unfair or straight up cheap. When I'm not asking myself what the hell happened that caused me to die, instead I'm falling into obvious traps where I could hear the level designer saying, haha, gotcha. Not that it matters, since Sonic Forces doesn't use a life system, but it does affect your ranking on beating a level, and higher ranks unlock you more clothing, so Classic Sonic's levels are easily the worst of the bunch though. While the level designs in Sonic Mania incorporated slopes and momentum in order to flow in a smooth and natural fashion, these look like something I would have made in click and play when I was 13, or if I'm generous, a newbie's attempt to play around in Sonic Worlds. So many blocky platform hops, so many long straights, and so many zigzag tunnels going back and forth as infinite padding. That's not level design, that's not fun, it's bad. Another of Sonic Force's numerous downfalls is the level themes themselves. While there are 30 stages in total, there are only 7 distinct locations these take place in: Green Hill, Chemical Plant, the City, Metropolis, Mystic Jungle, the Death Egg, and Eggman's Fortress. Disregarding how 2 of these essentially reuse assets from Sonic Generations with a few minor tweaks here and there, this still means that you will be revisiting areas that look exactly the same up to 5 times in a playthrough, and that's without considering the optional bonus missions. In the end, this makes Sonic Forces levels feel repetitive and unvaried. Thankfully, this isn't so bad, since Sonic Forces is genuinely gorgeous a lot of the time. Lighting in particular is definitely this game's strong suit, especially since it reacts to changes in the environment and gives off a sense of scale and the objects existing within a cohesive world, but particle effects look pretty slick a lot of the time as well. It's quite a feat how good Sonic Forces can look, especially at a smooth 60 frames per second on the PC port, although it does take a dip to 30 in the pre-rendered cutscenes. It's just a shame that a lot of what these graphics have to portray is so bland and boring no matter how colourful and poppy it is. And one issue that I have to mention in any Sonic review is the music. Tomoya Otani's work has been a highlight in previous entries, and a true joy across Sonic Adventure 2's Butt Rock, Rush Adventure's Big Beat, and the more conventional tracks in Heroes and Lost World. Hell, even Sonic 06's soundtrack was good. But this time, it's just all so meh. The orchestral stuff is generic to the point where I can't remember a single melody. The chiptune stuff they gave for classic Sonic just sounds like they told him to write songs that sounded video gamey, and for the rock tracks they keep using this horrible, ear-piercing synth that's just so bad. Thankfully the synths aren't trying to get a good original melody out though. Nah, rather they're putting out stuff that's yet again So bland it just ends up unmemorable, and the few vocal tracks have lyrics just as lazily written. In fact, laziness and a that'll do attitude seem to be the name of the game here, considering the aesthetics, music, and the way Forces just blatantly copies assets from Generations, which is now 6 years old and does little to nothing with them. You know, a ton of Sonic Forces' more nostalgia-pandering fan service moments seem to be ill-conceived and underutilized. Oh look, it's Chaos. Remember him from Sonic Adventure? Oh, bye Chaos. I understand referencing iconic moments in the series, but it doesn't work unless you build upon that or comment on it in some way. Just putting things in there, pointing at them and saying, hey look, remember that thing? So do we, is Family Guy tier referencing. You have all of these iconic rivals from Sonic's history, and Zavok, I guess, but you only get to fight 2 of them. It's just, why bother? Sonic Forces is the equivalent of throwing a bunch of ingredients into a bowl and then getting confused when you don't have the fully cooked meal. There are a lot of elements here that have either worked in previous entries or are agreeably good in concept, such as the basic boost formula for Mon Sonic, some of the level ideas, classic Sonic's inclusions, etc. But where the game truly fails is that it just slaps these things together without any proper effort or thought into how they'll interact with each other or what will hold them together. But as much as I could talk all day about the ways this title misses the mark, I should finish off this review. As a follow-up to Mania, Sonic Forces is disappointing. As a peer in the 3D platformer genre to Super Mario Odyssey, Yooka-Laylee, A Hat in Time, and even previous entries in its own series, particularly Generations, Sonic Forces is outright unacceptable. And it's totally appalling to me that certain apologist Sonic fans are setting the bar so low that it's not as bad as Sonic 06 or Sonic Boom are genuinely going to be used as points in Force's favour, especially considering how many times Sonic Team have made these exact same mistakes before. I'm gonna come out and say it, I've run out of both sympathy and patience for Sonic Team at this point. It's not like Forces was rushed, far from it in fact. They've been reportedly working on it since 2013, so I've got to wonder exactly how we've ended up with such a sloppy, undercooked finished product. Personally, my money is on poor management from Takashi Wisps Everywhere, Izuka, and Shun, I literally directed Sonic 06, why am I even allowed near a Sonic game again, Nakamura. But even if that was the case, they had so little to screw up here, especially when they had Generations as a template. Sonic Forces is not good, and you shouldn't make excuses and compromises to pretend it is, especially if you're a member of the Sonic fanbase and have been burnt before. You in particular should really know better. So no, I do not recommend this. Instead, I recommend that you buy Sonic Generations if you haven't already, or Sonic Mania. Both games are cheaper, hit a lot of the same beats, but those were actually fun, functional games with careful planning, passion, and polish put into them, whereas this is a colossal mess in every regard.